Welcome to Illo Talk. I am Cory Kerr, and this is episode 118. And today I'm going to talk about something that makes me uncomfortable, but I do it anyway. Giving advice on the internet. So I guess I'm going to talk about the problem with giving advice on the internet. And so I want you to imagine a situation, right? So imagine a world where landmarks move and change form, and roads never lead to the same place, place names rewrite themselves, the language on signs isn't consistent, and you've been somewhere, but you've only been there one time, and you've forgotten how to get there, and somebody asks you for directions. That's kind of like giving advice on the internet. What you say is going to be true for your own specific experience, but it's not going to be true for really anybody else. And when I say true, I'm talking about eternal truths, right? There are very few of those. And the problem is that to give really good advice, you have to be one of two things. Either so vague that you're not actually saying anything, or you're getting specific to the point where it's not always true. There's going to be a situation or something that comes up that is going to make that be bad advice. And I really can't think of many things where that isn't true. For example, a generally good piece of advice is that you should have a personal project and you should push yourself hard. And when you have artist block or writer's block or whatever, you should push through it, right? And that's, you sit down and you do the work. That is generally really good advice, but it's not always true. Like, there are times where you need to take a break. You're working too hard. You're burning yourself out. You haven't done anything to refill or revitalize your well of creativity, and you're just running on empty. And so, while that is really good advice, and it's true most of the time, it's not always true. And I've just seen recently, I don't want to point any fingers or name any names, but there are people out there on YouTube and Twitter and elsewhere that are, their shtick is to give advice, is to help artists out, is to, make things that make it easier or better to create and to be an artist. And I sort of fall into that category a little bit. Like, I have several playlists on my YouTube channel that their sole intention is to teach people things and educate things. And then even on Illo Talk, I will often give advice, and I will often do that. But my intention for that is not to set myself up as an expert, and not to say that everything that I say is the absolute truth and always has been true and always will be true. And the fact of the matter is that I disagree with a lot of the things that I've said in the past. But at the time that I said them, they were true for me at that point in time. And I think that could be really useful. But I think we take the things that people say too absolutely. One of my favorite ironies in Star Wars is when Obi-Wan and Anakin are fighting, and Anakin has all but turned to the dark side, and Obi-Wan says, only a Sith speaks in absolutes. He's making a definitive absolute statement at that point in time. He's not a Sith, and yet he's saying that only Siths do this. And so, while it might be true to a certain extent that, Siths are black and white or whatever, deal in absolutes, or you're with me or against me or whatever, that type of thing, in his statement, he contradicts himself. And so I think there are relative truths. And I think that's where most advice on the internet falls, is within this category of relative truth. Another one that I hear a lot of is, finished is better than perfect, or done is better than perfect. And I've heard arguments for and against that. And I think all of those things are true, right? And so if I were to go to somebody and say, you need to eat less and you'll be healthier, well, that is true for somebody like myself who, I fight gaining weight and things like that. But somebody who's struggling with anorexia, like, that's not good advice. That's not true for them. But it doesn't make it an untrue statement or a lie. It just makes it situationally appropriate. And so I think with advice, if you look at something like, finished is better than perfect, like, that is really, really true for somebody who struggles with perfectionism, for somebody who struggles with finishing things, for somebody who struggles with, like, starting lots of projects but never actually concluding anything, or they never actually get done, or they just noodle on the same thing, or they go redo the same pages over and over again. It's really good advice for that person. It's really terrible advice for somebody who they just can't draw yet. Like, you need to focus on drawing. You need to get a lot of drawings out, and you need to focus on the quality. You need to focus on the nitpicky things so that you can hone your craft and get better at it. But that doesn't make it bad advice. It just makes it situational advice. And so I look at a lot of things like this, and this is one of the reasons why I feel uncomfortable giving advice on the internet. And yet I do it all the time because it's helpful to some people, and to others, it's not. And they move on, or they disagree with me, which is cool. I'm totally fine with being disagreed with. In fact, I would like, more people to say, I listened to your video and I kind of think of this instead. And as long as that's a reasonable, conversation that doesn't involve othering and name calling and, whatever, and things aren't heightened, I'm totally down with that. I've changed so many of my opinions as I've matured and as I've grown and as I've experienced more things. But I don't think that makes the opinions that I used to have untrue. I just think it makes them relatively true or situationally appropriate. So anyway, all of this comes down to kind of like art advice and creative advice and whatever. And I see lots of people out there, and they're doing listicles and they're doing videos where they're telling you, these are the 3 things you need to do to get X or to become Y or whatever. And there's no right answer. Those are actually really useful videos. They're really useful podcasts. They're really useful articles. But if you look at them as definitive, as written by the finger of God on stone, you're going to have a problem because the world changes. So imagine that situation. You're in this weird dystopian future sci-fi fantasy situation where roads move and never point in the same direction and everything changes, or like the video that I did a little while ago where as you run along the path is destroyed behind you, and so the directions that you give can't be specific enough to everyone to be totally useful. Now, I can give you directions from the town I live in to a specific area in another town because the position is fixed, right? Geographic locations don't change that frequently. And I can say, at this building, you will notice this thing, and then, there's 3 trees that are right next to each other. You want to take a left there. I can even be very specific, with geographical landmarks and things, because it's a fixed situation, and it's a location that can be traversed intentionally over and over and over again. But life isn't like that. Life isn't like that at all. And so what you get with life is you get a direction. And this is where my existentialism kind of comes into play. And I don't even know if I understand existentialist theory enough to call myself an existentialist, but I think that's kind of the point of existentialism anyway, is if you get to understand it too much, it becomes problematic. But one of the main concepts is that you have to somehow grapple with or embrace or come to accept the absurdity of life. And the absurdity of life, or what they call the absurd, is this idea that it doesn't make any sense. It's senseless. It's not kind of a niche or I'm blanking on the theory where nothing matters. It's not that, because things matter a lot. Your actions matter, your behavior matters, the things that you accomplish or don't accomplish matter, the things that you say and how you treat other people, the way that you live your life, it matters, but it doesn't matter by way of things that are outside of your control. So for example, breaking into comics. I hear this a lot. How do you break into comics? Well, I just interviewed Jason Copeland, and I've listened to, tens, 20s, I don't know. I don't want to say hundreds, but lots and lots of interviews, and I've read lots of articles, and I've seen people on Twitter answer this question of how you break into comics. And everyone's story is completely different. And everyone's story is one of those things where the planets align. There's a specific set of instances that happen. There's a lot of work and effort to prepare for an opportunity, but the opportunity is outside of that creator's control. The opportunity presents itself, but you can't control when it presents itself. And so there are many, many people that are exceptionally good artists. And for whatever reason, they missed that opportunity, they weren't ready for it, or it never shows up. And that's true of a lot of things. There are very intelligent people that aren't CEOs. There are CEOs that are not very intelligent people. And so, there are athletic, bright, beautiful, talented, and kind people that are killed, by death, obviously by death, by disease or by, happenstance or by accident or whatever. And they're cut down in the prime of their life. And that's absurd. It's absurd that person was wasted in this experience. And you have to understand, you have to come to grips with existentialist theory. You have to come to grips with the fact that this existence, this plane of existence that we're on, whatever you want to call that, is absurd. But that doesn't make it meaningless. And so the meaning is in what you add to the experience, what you choose to value, and what you do. So you are, that phrase, you are what you eat. You are how you act. You are how you behave. You are how you speak. You're not who you profess to be, but you are who you act to be. And so I can profess to be an honest person, but if I go around lying all the time, my professions of honesty are not valid. What I say about myself is significantly less important than what I actually do. And so there is meaning, and I can give meaning to my life when I do meaningful things. But the world is still absurd. And so instead of trying to make sense of the world and give advice that is universally and unilaterally always 100% of the time true, we do our best and we say, I've noticed this. Maybe this is helpful. In my own experience, this is what's happening, and I've noticed this. And then a year later, 6 months later, 5 years later, maybe that becomes completely untrue for me. But that doesn't mean that it wasn't true. It just means it was relatively true. And that the situation has changed. The relativity of that situation has altered that experience and that truth for me. And so, I know this sounds like I'm talking in circles, but the whole point of it is this. I think we need to be a little less hard on each other, especially those of us that are trying to help. If I'm trying to help, and other people are trying to help, and we're trying to help in a different way, I can point out that, be careful, because there's some flaws in in that piece of advice, that's much different than saying that person's a shyster and they're out to get you. And I do believe that there are people that are not of good intent or whatever, but I just don't think you can take, well-meaning advice and use that against someone, because in certain situations it's not true. Because that is literally true of almost every piece of information that you will come across. Time, space, and experience are all going to affect how we interact with the world. And in any case, so given all of the relativity and unsuredness and non-absolute talk that I've just given, I wanted to give you just a list of a few things that I think, I'm pretty certain most of the time these are going to be really, really useful. One is, if you want to be something, then you need to spend your time doing the things that person does. So if I want to be an artist, I need to draw and paint all the time. If I want to be a writer, I need to write a lot. If I want to be a dancer, I need to dance. So what defines us is by what we do. And so if I want to be something, then I need to go out and need to do those activities that are done by the people that are that thing, right? That doesn't mean that I do them in the same way, or that I draw the same things, or I copy other people's style, or I dance the same dances, sing the same songs. But what it means is that the behavior is something that I take on and I take it into myself. Another thing is, and I think this is generally good advice, you should compare your work to really high quality work up until the point where it will continue to help you improve, but not beyond that point to where it becomes debilitating and depressing. And so I think human beings have a natural tendency to, I know I do this all the time, compare our worst qualities to other people's best qualities. And while it's not fair of me to compare my current work to somebody who has been drawing, hundreds of thousands of hours more than me, I don't even know if that's capable mathematically in a lifetime, but, tens of thousands of hours more than me and has decades of experience more than me, that's not a fair comparison. It can be a useful comparison. So I make that comparison to the point where I use it to improve, but not to the point where I beat myself up. Another one that I think is universally useful is that your self-talk should be managed. And I'm not one for like positive affirmations or anything like that, but as somebody who suffers from imposter syndrome, self-talk is important to pay attention to, and the things that you allow yourself to think about yourself, the descriptors that you use about the things that you create, they can be very closed or they can be very open. And so there's this closed mindset, growth mindset thing that a lot of people are talking about nowadays. And a closed mindset is fixed in a position. And that is, I suck as an artist. It's a fixed position. There's no getting better from that. You've made a declarative, definitive statement. It's different than saying, I can see the things that I need to improve in my work. My work isn't where I want it to be, and I want it to be better. That's a growth mindset, identifying that there is improvement to be had, but not making a definitive and declarative statement of a fixed position. And so in the way that you allow yourself to think, now I'm saying this as somebody who measures the success of their art in the amount of time it takes for me to hate what I've produced. And so if I can go for a few days before I look at something and go, that is garbage, I I count that as a success, because typically most things, I dislike them within minutes or hours of completion. And so I say this as somebody who is actively monitoring my self-talk. I think self-talk is important. And so that's another one. And so there's a few things. I also just think we're losing. I've noticed amongst college students, and a group of professors and I today were having a conversation about writing. We were talking about how we're struggling to teach writing. We're struggling to get people to write well. And, a lot of people were focusing on grammar and punctuation and spelling and, the rules but rules doth not a good writer make. And so there are lots of people who know all of the rules of writing, but they're not good writers. They might be excellent editors, but they're not good writers. And the reason for that is knowing where the out of bounds are is only part of the game. The other part of the game is knowing where the goals are. And the only way that you can know where the goals are is not to focus on when the ball goes out of bounds, but to focus on, the goal. And by focusing on the goal, you have to read a lot of good writing. And not just novels, though novels can do it, but short stories and poetry and articles in the New York Times and the Atlantic, and listen to Fox News and MSNBC and CNN and look at professional work and consume a lot of this. I listen to a ton of audiobooks, not as many as most, but more than some. And I've recently been listening to a lot of sci-fi old-time radio. And so, the 40s through the 80s, 40s through the 70s, they had radio dramas. And each show is 20 to 40 minutes long, and it has a beginning, middle, and end. They're really interesting. And I wouldn't say that the dialogue is necessarily on par with, a lot of the classics. Because it's written quickly. They did hundreds and hundreds of episodes. But at the same time, the storytelling craft is really fascinating. And the reason that I'm consuming shorter form storytelling is because I was looking back at, I want to get back into comics. I want to start doing some comics after I, make some progress on this animation, and get some more illustrations done. I want to make some comics. And the first and only not the only, but the first comic that I started when I was learning how to draw, I had this great story, and it was awesome. And I did what every beginning comic book writer artist does. I had this gigantic, epic, multi-character, world-ending, multi-universe, pluriverse expanse type story that, if I told it really concisely, I was into the hundreds of pages. Hundreds of pages. I did roughly 60 pages of it. And I realized that in 60 pages, I got my characters from one place on the map to just down the road. And there was only two major things that happened. And I was like, how did I spend so much time doing so little? And it would have taken me another 2 years to wrap that up. Now, I still think that's a great story. And I don't know, at some point in time, I would really like to either collaborate with somebody and put that story together in comic book form, or just spend 3 years of my life doing it. It's a really good story, but it was so long that I needed to learn. I mean, I had been reading prior to that. I went through a phase where I was reading romantic era Russian literature. Anna Karenina, Fathers and Sons, that type of stuff. Long War and Peace level stories with hundreds of characters that take forever to tell, thousands and thousands of pages. And I realized that I needed to steep myself in shorter form stories. And so I'm listening to these radio dramas and I'm listening to short stories. There's a couple podcasts like Selected Shorts and things like that, Relic Radio. And I'm listening to these because if I am to get better at telling more succinct stories, I don't just need to understand the rules of doing that. I need to understand how professionals have done that well. And I need to fill up my creative well, right? If I throw a bucket down the well and I pull it back up and there's nothing in it, it's because there's nothing going into the well. There needs to be a source of water before you can draw water. And the source of water, when it comes to creativity, is consuming good work. And so we were talking about this. We were talking about a lot of students don't know how to write. And it's because nobody reads anymore. Very few people. It used to be all over the place, but now it seems to be that fewer people are reading more, but most people are reading considerably less. And so while printing and publishing is going up, and more printed books are being printed all the time, it seems like there are fewer and fewer readers. And part of that is that it's a very difficult activity to do. It's hard. If you think about it, you can't multitask while you're reading. Most people can't. And so it's the only thing you do. And we're in an age where we have multiple screens that we're consuming at the same time, and it takes very little effort to be entertained. Reading is a difficult task, but I think reading is important. And so if you want to be a writer, you need to read a lot. You can't just sit down to write. That's part of it. And you can't just know the rules. That's part of it. But you also need to be saturated with good writing. Be saturated with other people's work. And it's the same with drawing. It's the same with playing music. It's the same with any creative endeavor. There's no creation from nothing. You can't take nothing and create something from it. You have to have elements to work with. And so those elements come from other people's work. Not that you steal that work, but just that you consume enough of it so that you have good voices in your head when you're trying to make work. So I feel like I've talked for a really long time. I don't know how long this has been going, but there's some advice. It's probably wrong in some situations. Most likely it is. I don't know. I don't know when reading would be wrong, but I guess if somebody is a voracious reader and they want to be a writer and I tell them that they need to read more, that's probably the wrong advice if they're not actually sitting down to write. So anyway, there's some situational advice for you. But yeah, just I don't know why I wanted to do this one. I just came across some, and it wasn't just one person, it was a number of people over different topics kind of flaming each other for giving advice when there are situations when that advice isn't true. And I don't know. I think there's bad advice out there too. So there's some ramblings for you. What you are seeing me work on right now is something I'm going to finish up. And if you want to watch me draw the beginning of this, then you need to go back to the Artcasters. I can't remember if it was on Scott Cirkland's or Joshua Kemble's thing, but it was on one of those. And it'll probably come up on the screen at some point in time. And you'll see me draw the beginning of this. And I will finish it at some point, hopefully. And in the meantime, you can check me out on Twitter at Cory Kerr and on Instagram at Cory R. Kerr and here on YouTube at Cory Kerr Art. And if you liked this video and you're new here, subscribe and then hit that little bell so you know when I post new stuff. And if you've already subscribed, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed, you're also welcome to hit that like button. Most importantly, do you disagree with anything that I've said? Because I'd love to hear it, because I'm probably wrong. And I'm also probably right. depending on who you are and what your situation is. So, anyway, we'll catch you guys later. I'm done rambling. I'm out.